let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive where we take that, that huge ocean of information, all the articles, the research you shared with us on language learning, and we really try to distill it down to the insights you can actually use. And today we are tackling something that is, well, it's a quiet killer of motivation. It's a thought, maybe just a little whisper in your head that I know every single person listening has had. It doesn't matter if you've been learning for a year or a decade. It's that moment you stop, you look around and you think, I've put in so much time, I've read the books, I've done the flashcards, but I still stumble. I still pause to find a word.
Mhm.
And I am absolutely nothing like those fluent speakers, whether that's a native speaker or just, that one person in your class who seems to get it so easily. That right there, that is the comparison trap. And it's so insidious. It just sucks the joy right out of learning and it replaces it with this pressure and shame. We've gone through all the sources you sent on this, and the message is just crystal clear. This mindset isn't just unhelpful. It is actively harmful, and we need to take it apart.
That's absolutely right. The research, the insights from educators,
Ah,
everything you provided just confirms how serious this is. This isn't a small thing. We're talking about something that literally stops people in their tracks. We found one quote that really stood out. A language expert in one of the sources called "Comparing Yourself to Native Speakers," and I'm quoting here, "one of the most destructive and harmful things you can do when you're learning a new language."
wow.
Yeah, that's incredibly strong language. It tells you this isn't just, a normal human thing we have to deal with. It's a real barrier. It changes your focus from what you can control, like your effort, to this impossible external standard.
Destructive
Yeah.
and harmful. Okay, so here's our mission for this deep dive. If we agree that this is toxic, then we have to get clinical about it. We need to unpack why. Not just it feels bad, but why it's so damaging on a deeper level. We need to break down the flawed logic behind it, and trust me, it is flawed. And then, the most important part, we need to pull out some practical, actionable strategies you can use to shift your focus back to your own journey, to turn that comparison into
Yeah.
inspiration.
Exactly. We're going deep into the psychology of it, the reasons why that comparison is so damaging. And then, we'll spend most of our time showing you how to systematically recalibrate, how to point your internal compass back to your own progress so your energy goes into practice, not self-criticism. If you're out there feeling stuck, this deep dive is about giving you permission to just embrace your own path.
So let's start at the very beginning of this whole downward spiral. The temptation itself. I mean, we are just swimming in highly fluent input, right? We see native speakers on TV, we hear them on podcasts.
Or at work, in meetings.
Exactly. Or you see that one really advanced peer in your language group who just seems to glide through conversations. The urge to measure yourself against them is, well, it's almost impossible to resist. It's a natural human thing, social benchmarking.
It's a profound primal instinct. But you take that instinct and you put it in the context of learning a second language, and it's a setup for emotional failure. The resources you shared were so consistent on this. The inevitable result of that constant upward comparison, as the researchers call it, is feeling inadequate.
Upward comparison.
Yeah, you're always looking up. You see someone speaking fluently. Maybe they're telling a joke or giving a presentation, and the thoughts that start running through your head are just... they're so demotivating. You think she speaks so effortlessly, and then the next thought is almost automatically, I'll never sound like that.
And I think that word effortlessly, that's the key illusion here, isn't it? We have to spend a minute on that. Because what we see is the polished surface, the end product. We don't see the thousands upon thousands of hours, often decades of input, of making mistakes, of cultural immersion that went into creating that effortless flow.
It's the cognitive equivalent of looking at a finished skyscraper and not seeing the years of blueprints, the foundation being poured, the steel frame going up piece by painful piece.
That's a great way to put it.
And when we compare our messy construction site, which is our own language journey, to their finished building, our own struggles just feel massive. Our pauses, which are totally necessary for our brains to process, they suddenly feel like fundamental failures.
So it feels bad. We've established that. But how does it cross the line from just feeling bad to being truly toxic? What's the mechanism there?
The sources point to this as a major threat to your mindset. This constant upward comparison, it hijacks your internal definition of success. So instead of making you want to study harder, which is what some people think it does, it actually kicks off this negative emotional spiral. It drains the motivation to practice at all. The toxicity is that it shifts your focus away from things you can control, like input, effort, and your learning strategy, and puts it on this idea of like an innate fixed ability that you just don't have.
Okay, but let me push back on that a little. Isn't a little bit of comparison healthy sometimes? Doesn't seeing someone who's really fluent sometimes light a fire under you? What did the sources say about that?
That's a really crucial distinction to make. I'm glad you brought it up. Healthy comparison is analytical. It's, okay,
Yeah.
I see they've achieved X. What strategies did they use? How can I learn from that?
So it's about deconstruction.
Exactly. But the toxic comparison we're talking about here, it rarely stays analytical. It becomes purely evaluative. It's they achieved X. And since I can't do that right now, I must be fundamentally flawed.
Mhm.
And if you start believing that you're just incapable, you stop trying. The research is clear on this. It makes the whole pursuit of progress feel meaningless. Like the source said, it's toxic for your progress. If your goal is to communicate better tomorrow than you did today, this comparison is an enemy to that goal because it destroys the belief that your effort actually matters.
That makes perfect sense. You move from believing, I can get better if I try, to this despairing thought of my trying is pointless because the gap is just too big.
Mhm.
And if it's an enemy to progress, we have to neutralize it. But to do that, we have to really understand the logical flaw in the comparison itself. Because when you break down why we compare ourselves to a native speaker,
Mhm.
the whole standard just falls apart.
It absolutely crumbles. The standard is completely unreasonable. And just acknowledging that, that's the first huge step toward finding some emotional freedom in your learning. So let's get into the logistics of this unfair standard. Understanding the objective difference really takes the emotional sting out of it.
All right, let's talk about that logical flaw, because the sources gave us this really fantastic analogy to show just how absurd it is to compare an adult learner to a native speaker.
Yeah, they call it the Mozart analogy.
Mozart analogy, right?
And the analysis says that comparing your English or any language you're learning to a native speaker's is basically like comparing a novice pianist, someone who's had maybe 6 months of lessons, to Mozart.
I think we need to just sit with that for a second because it's such a perfect metaphor.
It is.
When you think about Mozart, it's not just talent, right? It's mastery that was refined over a developmental lifetime. A new pianist is just. They're struggling to read the notes, their fingers are clumsy.
Yeah, they wouldn't watch a performance of the Requiem and think, you know, if I just practice for another 6 months, I should be conducting symphonies.
No, that would be completely absurd.
But linguistically, that's exactly what we do to ourselves. The sources spell out the stark reality of the native speaker's advantage. They've had their entire life immersed in the language.
The sheer volume of data is just staggering.
It is. We're talking, what, 15, 20,000 hours of nonstop input by the time they're an adult? We're comparing our few hundred hours of structured study against a lifetime of cumulative experience.
And it goes even deeper than that, doesn't it? It's not just about the hours. The sources bring up what they call the infancy advantage.
Yes, this is key. The difference isn't just years of practice. It's the developmental window when the language was installed in their brains. Native speakers had the sounds, the grammar, the culture drilled into their brain from infancy.
And when we say drilled, we don't mean they were sitting there with flashcards.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It means sheer, unavoidable 24/7 exposure during the most flexible years of brain development.
Right.
When a child learns their first language, their L1, they're building the entire neurological framework for communication at the same time they're building their map of the world. They're functionally native by age 5 or 6. That's 5 or 6 years of intense subconscious processing that physically molds the brain's circuits for that specific language.
So then you compare that to the adult learner.
Right. And the sources note, many of us start in our teens or as adults long after those neural pathways for sound and grammar have sort of settled. They've been highly optimized for our first language.
Which is where you get L1 interference.
Yeah.
Your brain's existing system is so efficient that it actively fights the new data.
That's a perfect way to describe it. If your native language doesn't have, say, a certain vowel sound,
Yeah.
your adult brain has to consciously override decades of training that told it that sound wasn't important.
So you're basically reprogramming a machine that's already been calibrated for something else.
Exactly. And that reprogramming is analytical, it's effortful, We're using the same parts of our brain that we use for math problems, not the subconscious, effortless parts that a child uses. This is why the sources conclude it's just unrealistic and unfair to hold yourself to that native standard. Once you truly internalize that the difference is developmental and structural, not a reflection of your intelligence or your effort, it changes everything.
It lets you see the native speaker not as a competitor, but just as someone who started the race at birth.
Exactly. It removes the moral judgment.
But okay, let's move beyond natives for a second, because sometimes the comparison to peers is even more painful.
Mm-hmm.
We might rationally accept the Mozart thing for natives, but then we look at the person who started in our class the same year, and they just seem miles ahead. What about that?
Even that comparison, that peer-to-peer one, is incredibly misleading and unfair. The sources really emphasize this. Everyone's journey is it's completely unique.
You don't see the whole picture.
You never see the whole picture. You see their fluency, but you don't see their context. Maybe they live with a native speaker. Maybe their job forces them to use the language for 8 hours a day in high-stakes situations.
So they're getting way more immersion and practice.
Way more. Or maybe they just consume 10 times more media in the language than you do. Their input stream is a fire hose compared to your garden hose.
So we're comparing our 30 minutes on a language app to their constant high-intensity exposure.
It's a false equivalence. Or maybe it's just about different strengths. One learner might be amazing at mimicry and pronunciation, so they sound more fluent, while you might have an incredible talent for complex grammar that's perfect for academic writing.
And there's the whole idea of plateaus and surges too, right?
Absolutely. Language learning isn't linear. Someone who's ahead of you now might hit a plateau for 6 months while you suddenly surge forward because you found a method that clicks for you.
So if I don't know their whole story, their resources, their background, their personal strengths, comparing my output to theirs it's just meaningless.
It's worse than meaningless. It's counterproductive. The goalpost for them is based on their life. The goalpost for you has to be based on yours. The whole premise of external comparison is built on faulty data from the start. Okay. So we've established the standard is flawed, logically and structurally. Now we have to look at the practical, painful outcome of using that flawed standard. This is where that demotivation really kicks in and starts to halt your progress.
Right, because the feeling of being frustrated isn't the real problem. The real problem is what that feeling makes you do, or rather, what it makes you stop doing.
Exactly. It makes you stop practicing, which is the only thing that can actually solve the problem.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is. The research your material cited confirms this. That upward comparison, always looking at those of you, it doesn't motivate. It discourages. To be motivated, you need to feel competent and you need to see progress. Upward comparison makes you feel incompetent, and it makes you blind to the progress you've already made.
The finding about self-esteem and confidence was really striking here.
Yes. One of the research pieces pointed out that when a learner keeps thinking other students are better, it directly undermines their self-esteem and their confidence. This isn't friendly competition. It's a core erosion of your belief in your own ability to succeed.
And if you don't believe you can succeed,
Why would you bother? Why invest the time, the energy, the emotional resilience it takes to keep going? That perceived lack of competence, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
which leads right into what we were calling the progress blind spot.
Mm-hmm.
And this is such a silent killer of your long-term effort.
It's a perfect term for it. It's a cognitive distortion. When you're fixated on how far ahead other people are, you develop this tendency to just completely overlook your own real incremental progress. You're only measuring the huge distance to their idealized goal, not the distance you've already traveled from your own starting line.
Can you give us a really concrete example of that?
Yeah.
Because I think learners experience this every single day.
Of course. Imagine you've been studying Spanish for weeks and you finally master the difference between the preterite and the imperfect past tenses.
Which is a huge deal.
It's a massive cognitive leap. But then, later that day, you have a 2-minute chat with a native speaker, and they use some slang or an idiom you don't understand. The brain, caught in that comparison trap, immediately latches onto the gap. The idiom you didn't know, the fact that you weren't as fluid as them, it completely ignores the enormous gain you just made with the past tenses.
So you filter your own success through this impossible standard of perfection.
Precisely. And anything less than that perfection gets registered as a failure. You just climbed a huge hill, but you're only looking at Mount Everest in the distance, so you feel like you're perpetually not good enough.
And that feeling, if it persists, leads to the ultimate danger, right?
Yeah.
The motivational freeze.
That's the death knell for your practice. Let's walk through a scenario. Let's say there's a learner, Sarah, who's studying Japanese. She's super motivated, but she starts comparing how she speaks to this Japanese vlogger she follows, who just sounds so effortless.
Mm.
Sarah starts thinking, why bother speaking? My accent is so obvious. I'm always searching for words. I'll never be that good. That thought starts to drain her motivation.
And her behavior changes.
Her behavior changes. She cancels her weekly conversation practice, telling herself she needs to study more first. But that study time is now filled with anxiety, so it's not even productive. She starts avoiding social situations where she might have to speak Japanese. The fear of exposing that gap between her and the vlogger is now just too high.
So the effort required to speak feels pointless because the reward she set for herself, sounding like a native vlogger, seems completely out of reach.
You've got it. And this brings us back to that powerful finding from the sources. In the worst-case scenario, comparison leads to deep feelings of envy or shame that actually halts practice. This is where the loop closes on itself.
Shame makes you withdraw. You stop talking, you stop trying hard things, which means you stop getting input and feedback. And when you halt your practice, you guarantee you won't improve.
And that lack of improvement then validates the original feeling. See, I knew I wasn't good enough. It just starts the whole toxic cycle over again, but with even less emotional fuel in the tank.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy built on a logical flaw. We have to break that cycle. And the only way to do it is to fundamentally change the yardstick we're using to measure success.
Exactly. It's time to stop looking outside for validation and start looking inside. We need to replace that external, flawed comparison with an internal, healthy one.
Okay. So the core solution that all the source material points to is this deep cognitive reframing of what language learning actually is. The big shift is recognizing that it's more like a personal journey and not a competitive race. That not a race analogy is so important. A race implies there's one finish line for everyone. But language learning is more like a long-distance solo hike across your own unique terrain with your own gear and your own definition of what reaching the summit even means.
And the most critical piece of advice we can pull from this, the central idea for sustained motivation is this. Instead of comparing yourself to others, you have to consistently, actively compare yourself to your past self.
The you versus old you metric.
The you versus old you metric.
Huh.
It's the only healthy, objective measure because it puts all the power back in your hands. Your past self is the factual starting point, and your effort is the engine that creates the difference between the old you and the new you. It's inherently motivating because it's all about growth.
Well, let's make that really practical.
Yeah.
How do you apply that day to day? Because just telling someone to compare to their old self can feel a little abstract.
Right. So the sources suggest some key reflective questions to help you see the progress you've probably been ignoring. The first question is designed to get you to look at your receptive skills, your listening and reading, which almost always improve faster than your speaking. And the question is this. Think back a year ago, or even just 6 months. Could you understand as much as you do now?
That's powerful because if you're only focused on your speaking mistakes, you miss the huge silent leaps you've made in just understanding what's going on around you.
Totally. Maybe a year ago, a movie without subtitles was just a blur of noise. Now maybe you catch 60–70% of the main ideas. That 60% is a massive, measurable gain.
But it's a gain you ignore if you're only measuring against the native speaker who gets 100%. You see the 40% gap, not the 60% achievement.
Exactly. So the second question focuses more on functional, real-world use.
Wow.
It is. Could you have handled the specific conversations or written tasks that you managed this week?
So it's about real-world effectiveness.
Yes. Maybe this week you had to argue with customer service on the phone, or you had to explain a complex project detail at work in your target language. A year ago, the anxiety of that alone might have made you switch back to your native language.
Right.
The fact that you did it, that you navigated it and got the result you wanted, even if you made a few grammar mistakes, that is undeniable proof of functional growth. You use the language as a tool, which is the whole point.
The sources say the chances are extremely high that you have improved, even if you're not at your final goal yet. The problem isn't a lack of progress, it's a lack of consciously acknowledging that progress.
You have to force yourself to see the milestones. If you are showing up and doing the work, you are improving. We just have to make that quiet progress louder than the noisy feeling of inadequacy.
And that's where the story about the learner from the Babel challenge really hits home.
Yeah, that was a great example. This learner said the key to her staying motivated, to pushing through plateaus, was actively tracking her own progress. She was focused on seeing where I started and where I am now. And that process, that documentation, gave her, in her words, hope and inspiration to continue.
Okay, let's break down tracking, because for some people that might sound vague. What are 2 or 3 concrete, easy ways someone can create actual evidence of their own improvement?
Excellent question. It has to be tangible. So, method one, the time capsule recording. This might be the most powerful one. Today, record yourself on your phone for 1 minute. Talk about a simple topic like your job or a hobby, then put that file away and forget about it.
Okay.
6 months from now, do the exact same thing. When you listen to that first recording, you will have undeniable audio proof of your progress. You'll hear the difference in your vocabulary, your fluency, your confidence. You can't argue with your own voice from 6 months ago struggling to find a word you now use without thinking.
That's accountability you can actually hear. I love that.
Method two, the difficult text test. Find a challenging article or a book chapter today. Read it and highlight every single word or grammar point you don't understand. Put it away. 3 months later, read that exact same text again. Just seeing how much less you have to highlight is proof of huge growth in your vocabulary and reading speed.
Simple, but very effective.
And method three is the simplest of all, the interaction log. Just keep a note on your phone. Every time you successfully handle a tricky interaction, a phone call, an important email, a presentation, log it. Don't focus on the mistakes you made, focus on the outcome. Booked the hotel without switching to English. Explain the problem to the client.
So you're building a library of your own successes.
Exactly.
Right.
And when you review that log every month, it completely shifts your focus from what you can't do to what you have done. You're turning comparison into a tool for yourself, not a weapon against yourself. You're building that positive feedback loop. See improvement, feel motivated, practice more, see more improvement. That's the engine we need.
Okay, so we've made that critical shift from comparing outwards to comparing inwards to your past self, but we can take it even further. The next step is to actively focus on your unique assets, your specific strengths in the language.
This is so important because our definition of fluency is often way too narrow. We tend to think it just means speaking fast with a perfect accent, but there are so many other dimensions of language where an adult learner actually has a huge, often overlooked advantage.
Absolutely. The sources really push us to acknowledge our personal assets. You might not have a native speaker's easy rhythm, but because you're learning as an adult for a specific reason, you might have an incredibly strong vocabulary in a niche professional field.
Like engineering or medicine or finance? Exactly. A vocabulary that a random native speaker who works in a totally different field would have no clue about.
And we tend to just brush past that strength, don't we? We're so focused on not being able to tell a joke perfectly that we forget we can articulate a complex technical model to a global team. And professionally, the latter is often way more valuable.
And that leads to this really surprising and I think validating counterpoint the sources raised, the fluent speaker's weakness.
This is fascinating. How can a native speaker have a weakness compared to a learner?
It's all about how they learned. You, the dedicated adult learner, had to explicitly study the rules. You had to learn the grammar charts, the formal sentence structures. You had to learn why the language works the way it does.
Whereas a native speaker just absorbed it.
They absorbed it subconsciously. So while they can use the language perfectly, they might really struggle to explain why a certain grammatical structure is correct. They just know it sounds right.
So my ability to explain the difference between 2 complex tenses is actually a specialized skill they might not have.
It's a form of linguistic mastery. Think about writing a formal business email or a technical report. The L2 learner, who has intensely focused on those formal rules, can often produce cleaner, more structured, more grammatically precise formal writing than a native speaker who is just relying on their conversational intuition.
That's incredibly validating. It gives you permission to see yourself not as a second-rate copy of a native, but as someone with a different, specialized skill set.
The goal isn't mimicry, it's utility. It's about recognizing there isn't one single peak of language mastery. There are lots of different peaks, and you're climbing the one that actually matters for your life and your goals.
Which leads perfectly to that core mindset advice from the sources.
It does. The quote was, "Don't focus on yourself in comparison to others. Enjoy the process and learn about yourself as you're doing it."
That phrase, learn about yourself as you're doing it, is so profound. It's not just about learning grammar, it's self-discovery. You're learning how you solve problems, what strategies work for your brain, how you handle frustration. That self-knowledge is so much more valuable than a perfect accent.
It is.
So let's give the listener a concrete 4-step toolkit. That toxic thought is going to pop up again. The mind is a creature of habit. So when it does, what is the step-by-step process for neutralizing it and reframing it into something useful?
Okay, let's walk through that four-step cognitive conversion process.
Perfect. Let's use a real-world example. Say you've just been in a meeting and a colleague, let's call him Alex, was using all this quick natural slang and he felt slow and clunky. And the thought hits, I should be as good as Alex. I'm so far behind.
Okay, step one, catch the thought. The moment that thought appears, you have to stop it in its tracks. Acknowledge it without judging it. Okay, I'm comparing myself to Alex's speed. This is that toxic thought. Just stopping the momentum is half the battle.
Step 2. Reframe. Celebrate and analyze. This is the big pivot. Instead of seeing their skill as proof of your failure, you actively celebrate it. You turn envy into curiosity. You think, wow, Alex's command of idioms is amazing. That's really impressive. I don't know how they learned that.
They become a model, a roadmap, not a judge. You're turning comparison into analysis.
Step 3. Refocus on effort. Next, you remind yourself of the reality behind their skill. The sources suggest thinking something like, Alex has likely put in years of practice and immersion to get there. I can reach my own version of fluency for my needs with my own continued practice. This puts the focus back on effort, which you can control.
And that phrase, my own version of fluency, is key. You're defining your own goalpost.
Right.
And step 4, acknowledge recent improvement. This brings it all back home. You immediately follow up with a concrete reminder of your own recent success. You kill the shame cycle with objective evidence. You think, you know what, 2 months ago, I couldn't even follow a meeting like that. Today, I understood 90% of it, and I contributed 3 key points. That is real progress.
So you're actively intervening in your own thought process. You're taking the energy that comes from seeing someone else's success, and you're channeling it back into fuel for your own goals, not wasting it on self-criticism.
And this all leads to the final big idea from the sources, the true goal of learning. Your ultimate objective isn't to erase your identity. It's not to become a second-rate copy of a native speaker. The goal is much simpler and much more powerful: to be a better English-speaking version of you.
That's such a powerful way to put it, because the best version of you includes your unique perspective, your cultural background, your professional expertise, and yeah, maybe even your accent, which is just a sign that you're smart and resilient enough to operate in more than one language.
That identity is something to be celebrated, not erased. At the end of the day, language is a tool to express who you are. If you can do that effectively, if you can function successfully in the ways you need to, you have achieved fluency for your journey. The rigid external native speaker standard is simply irrelevant to that fundamental goal. Hashtag tag tag outro.
This has been such a vital deep dive. For everyone listening, let's just quickly run through the 3 core takeaways that we want you to hold on to.
First, remember that comparison is logically unfair. Think of the Mozart analogy. You're comparing your structured study time against an entire lifetime of subconscious input. It's an impossible and irrelevant standard.
Second, we saw exactly why that external comparison kills your motivation. It erodes your confidence, it creates that progress blind spot, and it can lead to a motivational freeze where shame actually stops you from practicing.
And third, the path forward is clear and actionable. The only healthy metric is comparing you versus old you. Track your growth, celebrate your unique strengths, and use that 4-step reframing technique to turn comparison into inspiration.
As we wrap up, let's end with one final thought to leave you with, something that builds on this whole idea of the personal journey.
Right now, you might be focused on the gap between you and those fluent speakers you admire. But I want you to remember this. Every single one of those fluent speakers, the natives, but especially the highly proficient non-native speakers you look up to, they were once learners in the struggle too. The people you're comparing yourself to now, they made the same embarrassing mistakes you're making. They forgot words mid-sentence. They had moments of deep, deep frustration and doubt, just like you're having today. But they pushed through it.
That's such an important realization, that the struggle isn't a sign that you're failing. It's a universal and totally necessary part of the process.
It's evidence that the process works. The existence of their fluency isn't proof of your failure. It is proof that persistence pays off. They got there by comparing themselves to their former selves and just putting in the work one mistake at a time. Your journey is the same. Focus on your path, celebrate your victories, and just keep going. You're doing great.
Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.